Okay, in this video today we are going to read through chapter 7 of Charles Dickens' David Copperfield. As we go, we will talk about some interesting, useful, intermediate to advanced level English vocabulary words. And also, don't worry if you're not intermediate or advanced English, because from time to time I will stop and summarize what we've read in simpler English, so you don't have to worry because this is actually very complicated language in this book. So we will be reviewing or summarizing what is meant in each paragraph. Okay, so let's get started with Chapter 7 of David Copperfield by Charles Dickens. My first half at Salem House. So little Davy in Chapter 6, he was sent away to a boarding school. And now the first days of class are starting. Okay, so let's see. And he met the boys. Let's see. So school began in earnest next day. A profound impression was made upon me as I remember the roar in the school room suddenly becoming hushed as death when Mr. Creakle entered after breakfast and stood in the doorway looking round upon us like a giant in a storybook surveying his captives. So obviously the boys are very afraid of Mr. Creakle. They were having fun, but when he entered the room, suddenly they became very quiet. Tungay stood at Mr. Creakle's elbow. He had no occasion, I thought, to cry out, "Silence!" so ferociously, for the boys were all struck speechless and motionless. Mr. Creakle was seen to speak, and Tungay was heard to his effect. "Now, boys, this is a new half. Take care what you're about in this new half." So I think what they mean by new half is new semester. So they went to school maybe from fall until winter, and then they had the Christmas holiday, and now it's the spring, the starting of the spring semester. So I think that's what they mean by half. This is the new half. So it's a new start of the school season. So try to behave, is what he's saying. In this new half, come fresh up to the lessons, I advise you, for I come fresh up to the punishment. I won't flinch. It will be of no use. You're rubbing yourselves. That's weird. But you know, we actually in chapter 6 we had this vocabulary word flinch. And I made a video practicing how to use it. And flinch is like this. when you're afraid somebody's going to hit you, you flinch. So he says, I won't flinch, meaning I won't hesitate to hit you. He's using flinch in a little bit different way. It will be of no use your rubbing yourselves. Maybe because this is rubbing. So maybe he's saying, I'll hit you. And it doesn't matter if you say, ow. You won't rub the marks out that I shall give you. So that's what he's saying. He's saying, I will hit you, it will make some marks, and it will be no use to do this. The marks will stay because they will be big. They will be hard. Now get to work, every boy. When this dreadful exordium was over, exordium, I'm sure that's not a word that we would use in regular modern English. I don't even know what it means. Let's take a look and see what exordium means. Beginning or introductory part, but that's not really a word that you have to worry about. Exordium. I've never seen that before in my life. When this dreadful exordium was over, so when this horrible beginning was over, and Tungay had stumped out again, Mr. Creakle came to where I sat, and told me that if I were famous for biting, he was famous for biting too. So if Davy was sent to this school because he bit his father-in-law, and his father-in-law requested that the school make him wear a sign, well, actually on his back, that says, "Be careful because I bite." So this is kind of a humiliation for him. And so he's wearing this sign on his back that says, "Be careful, I bite," as a humiliation. And he's not allowed to remove it. The teachers won't let him remove it. It's a requirement. He has to wear it. So the headmaster or the teacher, I'm not sure what Mr. Creakle is. I think he's the owner of the school. He says, "Oh, so you bite? Well, I bite too." Okay, let's see. He then showed me the cane and asked me what I thought of that. So a cane, in case you don't know, let's find a picture of a cane. Whoops, that's not what I'm looking for. Okay, this is a cane. So that's something that you can use to walk with. But especially in the past, I don't think that would happen now. But in the past, you could beat somebody with your cane. So that's why he's saying, "Let me show you my cane." So he's trying to scare Davy. All right, let's see. Wait a minute, where is it? He then showed me the cane, and he asked me what I thought of that. So he's taking the cane, he's saying, "What do you think of this?" Trying to scare him with his cane. "I'll hit you with it." Let's see. "I thought of that for a tooth." I don't know what that means. Asked me what I thought of that for a tooth. I'm not sure why he says "for a tooth" there. That doesn't make any sense. "Was it a sharp tooth? Hey?" That must be some old expression, something about teeth. I don't know. "Was it a double tooth? Had it a deep prong?" Let me show you what a prong is. I'm not sure how they're using it here, but actually prong is something. Oh, actually, when I type prong, it comes up prong cane. What's a prong cane? No. I guess maybe the prong part. Well, here, let me show you what a prong is. That's actually a useful word because when you're thinking about electricity or connecting things, sometimes you use a prong. So the part that sticks out, that's the prong. You have the black part, and then you have the metal silver part. That's a prong. Also, on a fork. Whoops. On a fork, those are prongs on the fork. And you can see the cane, the handle part. Maybe you would call that a prong. So that must be what he's referring to when he talks about a prong. So let's see. He then showed me the cane, and he asked me what I thought of that for a tooth. I don't understand the tooth reference. "Was it a sharp tooth, eh? Was it a double tooth, eh? Had it a deep prong?" So I guess the prong is the handle part of the cane. "Did it bite? Did it?" So he's holding the cane. "Does this bite like you?" As every question he gave me a fleshy cut with it. Oh, so he was hitting him as he, "Does it bite? Does it bite like you?" He was hitting him with it. And made me writhe. To writhe. I guess that could be our first vocabulary word. To writhe. Let me write that out. To writhe. And writhing is like a tense movement. I'm just going to get the official definition here for you because I don't trust my own. Yeah. So writhing is like, so he's hitting him with the cane and he's writhing. Ow, ow. Maybe he's not saying ow, but he's moving. He's reacting physically to being hit with the cane. So let's go back and read that again. Did it bite? At every question, he gave me a fleshy cut. So he was hitting him with the cane. That it made me writhe. Ooh, ooh. And so I was very soon made free of Salem House, as Steerforth said, and very soon in tears also. Okay, not that I mean to say these were special marks of distinction which only I received. So he's saying, well, you know, the Mr. Creakle didn't only abuse him, he didn't just hit him, he hit all of the boys. On the contrary, a large majority of the boys, especially the smaller ones, were visited with similar instances of notice as Mr. Creakle made the round of the schoolroom. Half of the establishment was writhing and crying before the day's work began. So every morning he would come in to the classroom and abuse all of the students. He would hurt them, hit them with his cane. Half of the establishment was writhing and crying before the day's work began. How much of it had writhed and cried? Boy, am I glad we put up that word writhe. He's using it quite a bit suddenly. And how much of it had writhed and cried before the day's work was over? So in the morning he would beat them, and throughout the day he would beat them. So almost everybody was in pain by the end of the day. I'm really afraid to recollect, lest I should seem to exaggerate. I think our next interesting word here is lest. It's a pretty fancy word. I would say, actually, this is an advanced word. It's a way, it's a signal that you can put in front of a phrase that means, oh, I'm afraid this thing would happen. So, for example, it's raining outside. Take an umbrella lest you get wet. So you say lest, and then you name something you're afraid of, something you don't want to happen. Getting wet, you don't want that to happen. Take an umbrella lest you get wet. It's pretty fancy advanced English. And I will make an exercise about how to use this word so you can practice it later. That's why I'm putting it up here, lest. Okay. So what is Davy afraid of here? He says, I'm really afraid to recollect, to remember, lest I should seem to exaggerate. So he's afraid to tell the story because he doesn't want to accidentally exaggerate. Like maybe he's remembering it worse than it actually was. I should think that there never can have been a man who enjoyed his profession more than Mr. Creakle did. So he enjoyed abusing these boys with his cane. He had a delight in cutting the boys, which was like the satisfaction of a craving appetite. Let's put the word craving up here. That's a good word. To crave is when you want something really bad because you enjoy it or you love it. So a lot of times you use crave to talk about food. Let's see, today's Christmas Eve. What kind of things would somebody crave on Christmas Eve? During Christmas, people like candy. So maybe you're craving candy. It means you want to eat candy a lot. You're thinking about it. You're obsessing about eating some candy. Craving turkey or craving pumpkin pie. I don't know. Something like that. Something you want really badly. So he's saying, Davy is saying that Mr. Creakle craves abusing the boys, hurting the boys. Let's see. I am confident that he couldn't resist a chubby boy, especially. Now, chubby, probably you know it, but just in case you don't, chubby is fat, but maybe not fat. Maybe between skinny and fat, you find chubby. So I'm confident that he couldn't resist a chubby boy. So there was one boy in particular he enjoyed beating with his cane, and it was a chubby boy. There was a fascination in such a subject which made him restless in his mind until he had scored and marked him for the day. So it seemed like he wasn't happy that day unless he could beat the chubby boy with the cane. So he really enjoyed beating that poor little boy. Okay, it's not funny. Let's see. I was chubby myself and ought to know. So he was saying I was also a little bit fat. So I know what it was like to be a target of Mr. Creakle. So I guess Mr. Creakle enjoyed hurting the fatter boys for some reason. It's kind of weird. Okay. I'm sure when I think of the fellow now, my blood rises against him with the disinterested indignation I should feel if I could have known all about him without having ever been in his power. Oh, that's a pretty complicated sentence. We've done the word indignation before. I think I have a video exercise about how to use indignation, and that means to be very angry, to become angry because somebody did something wrong or somebody did something bad. So obviously you would feel angry if you saw this teacher beating the students, and it would be the type of anger that everybody could understand. And this is indignation. So it means being angry because you see something wrong. That's indignant. Now, let's put this expression, my blood rises. This is a pretty common expression. When you talk about your blood rising, what you're saying is you're becoming hotter, there's more pressure, you're becoming angry. So he says, when I think of Mr. Creakle, my blood rises. I suddenly become angry. You know, he's writing this story as an adult. Maybe he's 25 or 30 or something like that, and he's remembering these things that happened to him when he was a boy. And even now, thinking about it, his blood rises. He becomes very angry. Okay, but it rises hotly because I know him to have been an incapable brute. A brute is a person who uses violence to accomplish things and doesn't have very good manners. Who had no more right to be possessed of the great trust he held than to be Lord High Admiral or Commander-in-Chief, in either of which capacities it is probable that he would have done infinitely less mischief. Well, that's a little bit of a complicated. Let's look at that again. Let's see. Who had more right to be possessed of the great trust he held. Wait. I know him to have been an incapable brute who had no more right to be possessed of. So Davy's saying, I know he was a horrible person, and it was very unfair or very bad that he had this position or power over the boys. He didn't deserve it. Nobody should have given him that power. And he's comparing that to being Lord High Admiral. So I think an admiral is in charge of a navy, or commander-in-chief, like the leader of an army. So he's saying you wouldn't trust him in these positions, and he could do much less damage in these positions, probably because there are other people supervising him. Oh, maybe we should put this word mischief up here. That's a word that sometimes people don't know. Mischief. Mischief means doing bad things. A lot of times it's used, at least in modern English. Maybe when they wrote this, let's see. I'm just looking for a picture. Maybe when they wrote this, it just meant doing bad things. But now, when you think of the word mischief, you usually think of something that's kind of a little bit funny. It's bad, but it's funny. It's often used with children doing bad things that, they're not supposed to do it, but actually you kind of laugh a little bit. It is a little bit funny, even though it's bad. I don't think that's how they're using it here. I think they just mean bad here. But I think in modern English, most of the time, when you talk about mischief, you're just talking about children doing funny things that are bad. They shouldn't be doing it, but you laugh a little bit. Okay, let's go back. Let me get rid of mischief here. All right. So he's saying he could do much less mischief as somebody in the army because he would be supervised. Here, he's not supervised. Here, he has complete power. So he's worse in this position than in a much more important position, like in the military. Okay, let's see. Miserable little propitiators of remorseless idle. Propitiators. Let's look up that word. That's not going to be a vocabulary word, but let's just look it up. Propitiators. Let's see. To propitiate is to reconcile or appease. So here's an example. She sent flowers as a propitiatory gesture. So the person sent flowers to apologize, to say, I'm sorry. So let's see, how are they using it here? That's not a word. You don't have to worry about that word. You'll never hear it again in your life, I promise. But miserable little propitiators of a remorseless idol. Okay, remorse is when you feel bad because you did something bad. So remorseless is somebody who never feels bad about what they do. You could do a very bad thing, but you don't feel guilt about it. So a remorseless idol. How abject we were to him. So now these miserable little propitiators, these are people saying, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. And Mr. Creakle is remorseless. He doesn't care. He just hits and he doesn't feel bad about it. How abject we were to him. What a launch in life, I think. I think it now, on looking back, to be so mean and servile to a man of such parts and pretensions. So now that he's remembering this time in school, he regrets being so submissive to this Mr. Creakle. I think he feels like it would have been better to fight with him a little bit, to challenge him. Here I sit at the desk again, watching his eye, humbly watching his eye, as he rules a ciphering book for another victim whose hands have just been flattened by that identical ruler. So earlier he was beating the children with a cane, and now he's talking about beating the children's hands with a ruler. Let me just show you what a ruler is in case you don't know. This is a ruler. Whoops. That's a ruler. So he was hitting their hands with a ruler. Earlier, it was with a cane. Now it's with a ruler. Okay, let's see. Here I sit at the desk again, watching his eye, humbly watching his eye as he rules a ciphering book for another victim whose hand was just flattened by that identical ruler, and who is trying to wipe the sting out with a pocket handkerchief. So Mr. Creakle hit his hand with a ruler, and now the boy is rubbing his hand. I have plenty to do. I don't watch his eye in idleness. But because I am morbidly attracted to it, in a dread desire to know what he will do next. Okay. Where was that word idle? I don't watch his eye in idleness. To be idle means to do nothing, to not move, to not be thinking about something. So he says, I don't do this in idleness. What he means is I'm watching this actually thinking about something or concentrating on something. It's not just a blank watching of this. And he says, but because I am morbidly attracted. Oh, wait a minute. I'm thinking how I'm going to explain morbidly, and I lost my place. Where did it go? I'm morbidly attracted to it, in a dread desire to know what he will do next. Okay. Did you ever notice... Morbid. Let's put that word up here. Whoops. I don't know if this happens in other countries, but I know in the US, also here in Mexico, when there's a car accident on the side of the road, when people drive by, this can create a horrible traffic jam, because when people drive by, they like to look. And I think everybody does it. And it's not because they enjoy seeing the horrible things that happen to the other person, but there's something called morbid curiosity. So morbid, it kind of means like disgusting or bad, but also like you can't stop it, you can't help it. So a morbid curiosity is you're not enjoying watching hurt people in the street, but it's impossible not to look. So that's what Davy is talking about here. Let's see. I don't watch his eye in idleness, but because I am morbidly attracted to it. So Mr. Creakle is beating a boy, and Davy has to watch. He doesn't like it, but he has to watch. He is morbidly attracted to it. Like the car accident, like watching a car accident when you're driving by. Okay, let's see. In a dread desire to know what he will do next. So he's kind of morbidly excited, like what's going to happen next, but he's not enjoying it. That's why he's using that word morbid. It doesn't mean that he's enjoying it, but he has to watch. A lane of small boys beyond me, with the same interest in his eye, watch it too. So all of the boys are watching. They can't stop it. They don't like what's happening, but they have to watch. I think he knows. I think he knows it, though. He pretends he don't. He makes dreadful mouths as he rules the ciphering book, And now he throws his eye sideways down our lane, and we all droop over our books and tremble. Tremble is move like this. He's saying lane, but I think in modern English we would say aisle. So they're in the classroom, and there are rows of desks, and between the desks you have an empty space, which I think he's calling a lane here, but I think in modern English we would call this an aisle. A moment afterwards, we're again eyeing him. Oh, to eye, let's put that up here, to eye something. To eye something. To eye something means to watch something, to look at something. So it's very similar to look at something, to watch something. Usually you say eye something because there's a goal at the end. So if you say, I've been eyeing this shirt at the store, it sounds like you're looking at it and you're considering buying it. There's like a goal at the end of it. When you eye someone, you're watching them because you think they're going to do something. Okay. So the man walked into the store and the owner was eyeing him. And now suddenly it sounds like the owner thinks he's going to steal or do something like that. That's how you use eye. It's like watch, but it's because you think something is going to happen. There's a goal attached to eyeing that doesn't happen with watch or see. So let's see, what is being eyed here? A moment after, we are again eyeing him. So all the boys are watching Mr. Creakle because they know he's going to do something crazy again. So they're watching him, waiting for him to do something. They're afraid of him. An unhappy culprit, found guilty of imperfect exercise, approaches at his command. The culprit falters. The culprit falters excuses and professes a determination to do better tomorrow. I think in the last chapter we did falter as a vocabulary word, so I've made a video practicing how to use falter, and falter means hesitate or do something without confidence. So when he says here, where is it? So the student approaches at his command. The culprit means guilty person. The culprit falters excuses. So Mr. Creakle is saying, you did a bad job with your schoolwork. And the culprit, the guilty party, the guilty student, falters excuses. So remember, falter means you do something, you hesitate with no confidence. So he says, well, I'm sorry, so he's trying to give an excuse, but he's doing it in a way that sounds nervous or scared. That's how we're using falter here. Okay. And professes a determination to do better tomorrow. So he says, I'm sorry, tomorrow I will try better. Mr. Creakle cuts a joke before he beats him. So Mr. Creakle makes a joke, and then he starts beating the student. And we laugh at it. Miserable little dogs, we laugh with our visages as white as ashes, and our hearts sinking into our boots. So this is a nervous laughter. They're laughing at his stupid joke because they're afraid of him. Oh boy, this is a horrible story. Let's see. Here I sit at the desk again on a drowsy summer afternoon. Oh, let's put the word drowsy up here. Drowsy means tired. So it's another word for tired, like almost going to sleep, ready to fall asleep. When you feel drowsy, You are almost going to sleep. So, what do you think a drowsy summer afternoon is? A drowsy summer afternoon. It's the kind of afternoon where you feel like taking a nap. Maybe it's a very quiet summer afternoon. Nothing is happening, and it would be so nice to take a little nap. A drowsy summer afternoon. Here I sit at the desk again on a drowsy summer afternoon. A buzz and a hum go up around me, and if the boys were so many blue bottles, a cloggy sensation of lukewarm fat of meat is upon me. We dined an hour or two ago. Okay, now I'm not sure about the blue bottle reference, but he says a cloggy sensation of lukewarm fat of meat is upon me. We dined an hour or two ago. So he had a lot of food a few hours ago, and he's still feeling it in his body, moving around in his body. And my head is as heavy as so much lead. So lead is a type of metal famous for being heavy. He says my head is as heavy as lead, so he really wants to go to sleep. I would give the world to go to sleep. I sit with my eye on Mr. Creakle. So they're in class, and he's almost about to fall asleep. Uh-oh. What's going to happen to poor Davy? So I sit with my eye on Mr. Creakle, blinking at him. So he's, his eyes keep closing, and he keeps trying to open them again, blinking at him. Like a young owl. Well, let's see. Well, I'm sorry, but I have to take a 1-minute break. I'll be right back. I'll just be back in 1 minute. Whoops, that's not the right one. All right. Thank you for waiting. Let's get back to our story here. Uh-oh. So Davy is feeling very tired. He had a big lunch. It's a drowsy summer afternoon, and he's sitting at the desk trying not to fall asleep. And he says, blinking like an owl. Well, just in case you don't know what an owl is, let's just look at a picture of an owl. Just for a minute here. This is an owl. So he says, I'm sitting at my desk, blinking like an owl. He's trying not to fall asleep, is what's happening. Okay. I would give the world to go to sleep. I sit with my eyes on Mr. Creakle, blinking like this. This is blinking. Blinking at him like a young owl. When sleep overpowers me for a minute, he still looms through my slumber, ruling those ciphering books, until he softly comes behind me and wakes me to plainer perception of him, with a red ridge across my back. So that's what he's saying is he actually fell asleep for a minute. But even in his sleep, he could still hear Mr. Creakle talking. And then suddenly he got hit on the back with the cane, and he woke up to the real Mr. Creakle, not the sleep consciousness Mr. Creakle. Here I am in the playground with my eye still fascinated by him, though I can't see him. The window at a little distance from which I know he is having his dinner stands for him, and I that instead. Let me read that again. The window at a little distance from which I know he is having his dinner. So Davy's in the playground and he can see a window from the building and he knows Mr. Creakle is in that room having his dinner. Okay. Stands for him, and I that instead. Okay, so again, we're using I as a verb. Do you remember what that means when you I something? That means you look at it because you think something is going to happen. You're looking at something with a goal in mind. So he eyes the window. He can't see Mr. Creakle, but he can see the window, and maybe something is going to come of that. Let's see. That's very complicated. That had me. I that instead. I the window instead. I look at the window instead. So, and what he's waiting for comes in the next sentence. If he shows his face near it. So, remember, if you watch the window, that just means you're looking at it. But if you eye the window, it's because you think something's going to happen. So he's eyeing the window, and he's waiting for Mr. Creakle to appear in the window. That's what he thinks is going to happen here. If he shows his face near it, mine assumes an imploring and submissive expression. So if Mr. Creakle comes to the window, Davy tries to look very sorry, maybe hoping that Mr. Creakle will feel sorry for him and not beat him or abuse him as he has done. Okay, if he looks out through the glass, the boldest boy, bold, let's put that word up here, because you know we use that quite a bit when we're on the computer, bold typing. Bold actually means brave. That's really what bold means. So when you're typing on your keyboard and you use the bold font, that's the brave font, the font that is not afraid. It looks big because it is not afraid. That is the bold font. That's really what bold means. It means not afraid. It means brave. Here, the boldest boy, Steerforth accepted, stops in the middle of a shout or a yell and becomes contemplative. One day, Traddles, the most unfortunate boy in the world, breaks that window accidentally with his ball. Oh no. So the boys are playing in the playground, and Mr. Creakle's window is there so he can see the boys, and they were playing with a ball, and Traddles broke Mr. Creakle's window. And that's why they're calling him the most unfortunate boy in the world. I shudder at this moment. Shuddering is this. Oh, so when Davy remembers what happened, he shudders. He says, "Oh, that was horrible. Oh, I shudder. I shudder at this moment with the tremendous sensation of seeing it done and feeling that the ball has bounded out to Mr. Creakle's sacred head." Oh, so the ball, wait a minute. Did the ball, let's read that again. I shudder at this moment with the tremendous sensation of seeing it done. So he pictures it, he imagines it in his mind, and he says, "Oh God, that was horrible. Ooh, shudder." And the feeling that the ball has bounded. So I guess the ball, it broke the window, but it also hit Mr. Creakle in the head. Poor Traddles. In a tight sky blue suit that made his arms and legs like German sausages or roly-poly puddings, he was the merriest and most miserable of all boys. Now, this word merry means happy. Merry Christmas, like today, right? Merry Christmas. Merry means happy. So he says he was the merriest and most miserable of all the boys. So he was the happiest, but also the saddest. Miserable is kind of like, it's not exactly sad, but it's similar. Okay, so Traddles, poor Traddles, he broke the window. He hit Mr. Creakle over the head with a ball. He was always being caned. So remember, a cane, we've got some new people here watching the video, so let's just review what a cane is. A cane is this. And when they say that Traddles was always being caned, that means that Mr. Creakle was always hitting him with a cane, beating him with a cane. He was always being caned. I think he was caned every day that half year, except one holiday Monday when he was only rulered. So remember what a ruler is, because Mr. Creakle has been beating the boys with a cane, but also a ruler, and so he was being caned and he was being rulered. So ruler goes on the hand, cane goes anywhere, I guess. I don't know the rules. Let's see. I think he was caned every day that half year, except one holiday Monday when he was only rulered on both hands, and was always going to write to his uncle about it, but never did. So Traddles wanted to complain to his uncle and tell him how Mr. Creakle was always beating him, but for some reason he never did it. After laying his head on the desk for a little while, he would cheer up, and cheer up means become happy. So after he would get beaten, he would put his head on the desk, he would lay his head on the desk, but after a while, he would be okay. He would become happier. He would cheer up. Somehow begin to laugh again and draw skeletons all over his slate before his eyes were dry. I think they've used the word slate a couple of times already. It's not an important word, but since they keep mentioning it, let's just look at what a slate is. It's not something used anymore. It's something that they used to use in school for children to write. So, just because they keep using that word. A slate, it's like a little mini blackboard. That's what the students used to write on in schools. So they said he would draw skeletons on his slate. So Mr. Creakle was talking, he would make pictures of skeletons on his slate. Okay. I used at first to wonder what comfort Traddles found in drawing skeletons. So Davy used to think, why does he draw skeletons all the time? That's so strange. And for some time looked upon him as a sort of hermit who reminded himself by those symbols of mortality. That caning couldn't last forever, but I believe he only did it because they were easy and didn't want any features. Uh, so he used to imagine that Traddles drew skeletons for some philosophical reason. So Mr. Creakle would beat him, and then he would draw skeletons and think about how temporary or this situation would be, just like life is temporary. But then later, as he grew up, as he matured, he thought, well, maybe he just draws them because they're easy. Okay, let's see. He was very honorable, Traddles was, and held it as a solemn duty in the boys to stand by one another. So Traddles had a very good character. He was a good person, and he always insisted to the other boys that they should stick together and never tell Mr. Creakle about something wrong. They should never tell on each other or get each other in trouble. They should protect each other. He suffered for this on several occasions, and particularly once when Steerforth laughed in church, and the beadle thought it was Traddles and took him out. So this is an example of the type of person Traddles is. One boy was in church and he laughed, and the person in charge thought it was Traddles, and so he beat him. But Traddles never said, "It wasn't me, it was him." He accepted the beating. That's the kind of character that he has. I see him now, going away in custody, despised by the congregation. So he's remembering that day. He never said who was the real offender, so he never named the other boy, though he smarted. Now, this word to smart, I mean, you know the word smart, of course, means intelligent. But to smart as a verb means to hurt. So let's see. He smarted, he hurt, he felt pain, he felt a lot of pain for it the next day, and was imprisoned so many hours that he came forth with a whole churchyard full of skeletons, swarming all over his Latin dictionary. So I guess that's how he released his pain. So he would get beaten, and then he would draw pictures of skeletons. So this time, his Latin dictionary, was full of skeletons because he was in so much pain. But he had his reward. Steerforth said there was nothing of the sneak in Traddles. And we all felt this to be the highest praise. So, Steerforth is the most admired boy in the class. I think he's also the oldest boy in the class. So Steerforth said, well, Traddles is the best. So all of the other boys admired him for it. So he received a lot of pain, a lot of beatings, but he also received a reward because Steerforth, who was like the boy in charge of the whole class, said, oh, Traddles is the number one boy. So he got a reward for that. Let's see. For my part, I could have gone through a good deal, though I was... What is that word? Much. It's hard to read that. I was much less brave than Traddles, and nothing like so old to have won such recompense. So Davy is saying, I was much younger than Traddles, but also not as brave as he was. So I don't know if I could be like him. To see Steerforth walk to church before us, arm in arm with Miss Creakle, was one of the great sights of my life. Oh, wow. So Steerforth, the head boy, the boy who's in charge, the student that all the other young boys admire, actually was walking, let me see if I can find, walking arm in arm, that's like holding hands, walking arm in arm, with Miss Creakle, Mr. Creakle's daughter. Wow. Okay. I didn't think Miss Creakle equal to little Emily in point of beauty, and I didn't love her, I didn't dare, but I thought her a young lady of extraordinary attractions. So, Basically, Davy's saying she's not my type, but she was pretty, and in point of gentility, not to be surpassed. And she was very ladylike. She had a lot of nice manners. When Steerforth, in white trousers, carried her parasol for her. A parasol is like an umbrella, but to protect you from the sun. I felt proud to know him, and I believed that she could not choose but adore him with all her heart. So Davy is saying, of course she was attracted to Steerforth because he was such a great guy. Mr. Sharp and Mr. Mell were both notable personages in my eyes, but Steerforth was to them what the sun was to two stars. So Davy really admired Steerforth. He really loved Steerforth. Steerforth continued his protection of me and proved a very useful friend, since nobody dared to annoy one of whom he honored with his countenance. So Steerforth continued protecting him, and nobody ever bothered Davy because Steerforth liked him so much. He couldn't, or at all events he didn't, defend me from Mr. Creakle, who was very severe with me. But whenever I had been treated worse than usual, he always told me that I wanted a little of his pluck, and that he wouldn't have stood it himself. Okay, wait. But whenever, this is a complicated sentence, but whenever I had been treated worse than usual, he always told me that I wanted a little bit of his pluck. Now, I'm just going to put a phrase up here. It's kind of an interesting phrase. To be plucky. To be plucky means to have a lot of energy, to have a lot of enthusiasm, maybe even optimism. Let's see. I wonder what Google would say if we ask it what plucky means. Let's see. To be plucky meaning. Oh, well, actually, what Google says it means to be brave. So let's say that. Let's say that to be plucky means to be brave. And so in this sentence, where did it go? Mr. Creakle was very severe with me, but whenever I had been treated worse than usual, he always told me that I wanted a little of his pluck. So what this is saying is Steerforth used to tell him, you should be brave like me. And that he wouldn't have stood it himself. So that means you can imagine Steerforth saying, if Mr. Creakle did that to me, I'd show him. Something like that. Okay, let's see. Which I felt he intended for encouragement and considered to be very kind of him. So maybe Davy thought, yeah, sure, of course, you would fight Mr. Creakle. He didn't really believe that, but he understood that it was a way for Steerforth to say, to make him feel better about the horrible situation he was in. I knew of in Mr. There was one advantage, and only one, that I knew of in Mr. Creakle's severity. He found my placard in his way when he came up or down behind the form on which I sat, and I wanted to make a cut at me in passing. For this reason, it was soon taken off, and I saw it no more. Okay, so now remember, the reason Davy was sent to this school was because he bit his father-in-law. And when he arrived at the school, the father-in-law gave instructions. They said, he must always wear this sign, be careful of me, I bite, as a humiliation. And he wore it on his back. But this was a problem because Mr. Creakle liked to beat Davy with a cane. and this plaque protected him. So at some point, Mr. Creakle removed the plaque so that he could beat him. And Davy was happy about that. He hated wearing that sign. Be careful, I bite. So he was at least happy. He wasn't happy about Mr. Creakle hitting him with a cane, caning him. But he was at least happy he didn't have to wear that sign on his back anymore. An accidental circumstance cemented the intimacy between Steerforth and me in a manner that inspired me with great pride and satisfaction. Though it sometimes led to inconvenience. Oh. Okay, so something happened, some kind of accident happened that brought Steerforth and Davy together to become really, really good friends. So let's see. I think he's about to tell us what that thing was. It happened on one occasion when he was doing me the honor of talking to me in the playground, and I hazarded the observation that something or somebody, I forget what now, was like something or somebody in Peregrine Pickle. Oh boy. He said nothing at the time, but I was going to bed at night and asked me if I'd got that book. So I think actually he mentioned this book earlier. Maybe this was a popular book at the time. Let's see. I'm just going to Google Peregrine Pickle because I think it's been referenced before. Peregrine Pickle. I have no idea what that is. Yes, it's a book. I guess it was maybe a popular story for boys at the time that this was written. Let's see. I'll just show you a picture of Peregrine Pickle. A picture from the book. You see, it's maybe a boy's adventure story or something like that. That's just a picture from it. Okay, so let's see. Let's read that sentence again now that we understand Peregrine Pickle and see if we can. So I hazarded the observation. Hazard here is being used as a verb meaning like accidentally. I hazarded the observation that something or somebody, I forget what now, was like something or somebody in Peregrine Pickle. So he doesn't remember exactly what happened, but he remembers that something happened, and he mentioned to Steerforth, oh, that's like in the book Peregrine Pickle. And Steerforth didn't say anything at the time, but later when they were going to sleep, he asked if Davy actually had the book. Maybe Steerforth wanted to read the book. I told him, so he said, do you have that book with you? And he said, I told him no, and explained how it was, that I had read it, and all those other books of which I had made mention. Well, I think that after he had the fight with his father-in-law, and he had some kind of fight with his father-in-law in an earlier chapter. Maybe that was when he bit his father-in-law, and for like a week, he was sent up to his room, and they locked the door, and he was alone for a week. And I think during that time was when he was reading these books. And I think that's when he mentioned Peregrine Pickle earlier. So Davy was explaining, no, I read that book during a very bad punishment. And do you recollect them, Steerforth said? So he's saying, do you remember the stories of all these books you read when you were being punished? Oh, yes, I replied. I had a good memory, and I believed I recollected them very well. Then I tell you what, young Copperfield, said Steerforth, you shall tell them to me. So look at that. You tell me the stories. Tell the stories to me. They're using spoken English here, even this, and this is like 160 years ago, but instead of tell them to me, it's tell them to me. because that's how it sounds in spoken English when you put them after a word. It usually just becomes tell them to me, tell me the stories, tell them to me, tell them to me. I can't get to sleep very early at night, and I generally wake rather early in the morning. We'll go over them. So to go over something, let's put that up here. That is definitely worth practicing. So again, I'm going to make fluency exercises, speaking and listening exercises with a lot of these words and phrases that we're learning. And to go over something is a phrasal verb, which means to look at something, to examine something, to concentrate on something, to think about something. So he says, we'll go over the stories, meaning we'll tell me the stories, we'll talk about them, we'll look at them. So to go over something is to examine it. And he says, we'll go over the stories, we'll go over them, we'll go over them, we'll go over them. That's even how it's written here, if you can see right above my head. We'll go over them, we'll go over the stories, we'll go over them. So even 160, 170 years ago, this is how people have always talked in English. We'll go over them one after another. So he says, when we're trying to sleep, you can tell me the stories. And you can tell me one, and then you can tell me another one, and another one. We'll make some regular Arabian Nights of it. I felt extremely flattered by this arrangement, and we commenced carrying it into execution that very evening. So Davy was very excited about this because they were becoming even better friends now. And they started that night. What ravages I committed on my favorite authors in this course of my interpretation of them, I am not in a condition to say, and could be very unwilling to know, but I had a profound faith in them, and I had, to the best of my belief, a simple, earnest matter of narrating what I did narrate, and these qualities went a long way. So basically he's saying here, I probably didn't tell the stories very well. I probably ruined the stories, but because obviously, you can't remember the whole books. But at the time, he believed he was doing a wonderful job retelling the stories in a perfect way. But he's sure now that he did a horrible job telling these stories. The drawback was that I was often sleepy at night or out of spirits and indisposed to resume the story. So drawback is like problem. The problem was that I was often sleepy at night. So he enjoyed telling these stories to Steerforth, but he was also very tired or out of spirits. Let's put out of spirits here. That's a good one, to be out of spirits. It probably was more common to use this in the past, but you can still use it now. I think I probably have used this expression, to be out of spirits. This means to not be in a good mood, to be sad or depressed or upset or some other negative feeling. So when you say I'm out of spirits, that means it could mean angry, it could mean sad, any kind of negative feeling. So you can ask someone, why are you out of spirits? That means, what's wrong with you? Why are you sad? Why are you angry? Why are you in a bad mood? It really is like a synonym for being in a bad mood. Okay, so the problem was I was often sleepy at night or out of spirits, in a bad mood, and indisposed to resume the story. So most of the time I didn't feel like telling these stories. And then it was rather hard work, and it must be done, for to disappoint or displease Steerforth was, of course, out of the question. So he's saying a lot of times I really didn't want to do it. I didn't feel like it. I was tired. I was in a bad mood, but I would never, never make Steerforth unhappy or disappoint him. That was not an option. So I always told the stories, even if I didn't feel like it. In the morning, too, when I felt weary and should have enjoyed another hour's repose very much, it was a tiresome thing to be roused like a sultan, like the Sultana Scheherazade, and forced into a long story before the getting up bell rang. So in the morning, Davy also told the stories, and he wished that he could sleep in, he could sleep more, but instead he had to tell these stories. But Steerforth was resolute, and he explained to me in return my sums and exercises and any in my tasks that was too hard for me. I was no loser by the transaction. So he's saying, actually, Steerforth helped him. So Davy would tell him these interesting stories, and Steerforth would help him with his work, with his schoolwork. He would explain things that he didn't understand. So he helped him do better in school. Let me do myself justice, however. I was moved by no interested or selfish motive, nor was I moved by fear of him. I admired him and loved him, and his approval was return enough. But he's saying it didn't matter that he helped him with his schoolwork or anything. He would have done it anyway because he loved Steerforth. He just did it because he loved him. That was the only reason. It was so precious to me that I look back on these trifles now with an aching heart. So he's telling the story now. And even now, he remembers how much he loved his friend in school. Steerforth was considerate, too, and showed his consideration in one particular instance in an unflinching manner that was a little tantalizing, I suspect, to poor Traddles and the rest. You know, in the last chapter, we did flinch, and we just talked about flinch because they used it again. I had no idea how common this word was. But now let's take a look at unflinching. Now, flinching is this: when you're afraid you're going to be hit. So unflinching means like brave, like you don't hesitate, you just do it. That's unflinching. And here, what was unflinching? So it means like not hesitating. Let's see. Where is it? Steerforth was considerate too, and showed his consideration in one particular instance, in an unflinching manner. Meaning he showed his consideration. He showed how nice he was without thinking about it, without hesitating. And that's what unflinching means. So it's the opposite of, because that's flinching. So being unflinching means you don't hesitate, you just do it, and you're brave. Okay, so let's see, what did Steerforth do in an unflinching manner? Let's see. I suspect to poor Traddles and to the rest, Peggotty's promised letter, what a comfortable letter it was, arrived before the half was many weeks old. So the new semester at school started, the half, and Peggotty, who was the servant of the house where he lived, who kind of was like a mother or grandmother to him, a letter arrived from Peggotty. What a comfortable letter it was, arrived before the half was many weeks old. So just a few weeks after school started, he received a letter from Peggotty, who was a servant in the house, but who was like his grandmother. And with it a cake, and a perfect nest of oranges, and 2 bottles of cowslip wine. So she sent him a cake and some wine. He's a little boy. He's like 8. She's sending him 2 bottles of wine. This treasure, as in duty bound, I laid at the feet of Steerforth and begged him to dispense. So Peggotty sent him the wine and the delicious cake and the oranges, but Davy didn't eat it. Instead, he gave it to Steerforth, and he asked Steerforth to dispense it. And dispense means give out. So he said, "Okay, here, Peggotty sent me this cake and these oranges and this wine. You take it, and you decide which of the boys can have what." So he didn't try to eat it. He gave it to Steerforth, and Steerforth decided who would have what. And Steerforth says, "Now I'll tell you what, young Copperfield," said he, "the wine shall be kept to wet your whistle when you're telling a story." To wet your whistle means to have some. That's a funny way of saying to have something to drink. So he's saying, you don't give the wine to anyone. We won't. You keep the wine, and you can have the wine to wet your whistle. That's a funny expression, to wet your whistle. So you keep the wine for when you're telling stories so that your mouth doesn't become dry. Like right now, my mouth is very dry. So I'm going to wet my whistle. I blushed at the idea and begged him, in my modesty, not to think of it. So he's saying, no, let's open the wine and share it with everyone. But he said he had observed that I was sometimes hoarse. Now, hoarse, to have a hoarse voice, this word hoarse, not horse like riding a horse, not the animal. This is Horse, horse. A hoarse voice is, if you smoke cigarettes, maybe you talk like this. Or if you're sick, maybe you've been coughing, maybe you talk like this. This is a hoarse voice. So Davies, let's see, he said he had observed I was sometimes hoarse, meaning Davy was always telling Steerforth these stories, and he was talking so much that sometimes his voice sounded a little bit like this. So that's what it means when he says, I was sometimes hoarse. I was sometimes hoarse, a little rupee was his exact expression. I've never heard that before, rupee. Let's see what that means, to be rupee. It might be, an old Victorian expression that people don't use anymore. I've never heard it before, to be rupee. What does rupee mean in English? Having the roop. Well, actually, it says a synonym of horse, Horse, but I don't think it's a common word. I've never heard it before. Okay, let's see. And it should be every drop devoted to the purpose he had mentioned. So he's saying, when you tell the stories, sometimes your voice sounds hoarse. And we should preserve the wine. We should keep the wine only for that occasion. Accordingly, it was locked up in his box. So he took the wine and he put it in a box he had, a protected box, and drawn off by himself in a phial and administered to me through a piece of quill in the cork, when I was supposed to be in want of a restorative. Okay. I'm not going to explain all of these words to you. It's a little bit complicated, but let's just say that Steerforth took the wine and he put it in a box that was protected. It was his box. And when he noticed that Davy needed something to drink because his voice was hoarse, he would get some and give it to him. Let's just say that without getting into the details. It's not important. Okay, sometimes, to make it more sovereign specific, he was so kind as to squeeze orange juice into it, or to stir it up with ginger, or dissolve a peppermint drop in it. So sometimes he would even put a little extra something nice in the wine for him. And although I cannot assert Just lost my place. Although I cannot assert that the flavor was improved by these experiments. That's what I was thinking, because it's wine and he's putting peppermint or orange or what was the other thing? Ginger. Doesn't sound very good. And now Davy's saying, well, actually, I mean, it was a nice thing that he did, but it didn't taste very good. Let's see. Or that it was exactly the compound one would have chosen for a stomachic, which I guess means something to relax your stomach, to help your stomach feel better. The last thing at night and the first thing in the morning, I drank it gratefully and was very sensible of his attention. So he's saying that didn't taste good, but what tasted good was the attention that Steerforth gave to him, that he didn't give to the other boys. We seem to me to have been months over Peregrine. So Davy told all of the Peregrine Pickles stories, and months over the other stories. So he told all of the stories that he had read. The institution never flagged for want of a story. I am certain that the wine lasted out almost as well as the matter. Poor Traddles! I never think of that boy, but with a strange disposition to laugh, and with tears in my eyes. So Traddles seems to be this confusing guy who's a combination of very pathetic and sad, but also fun. So when he thinks of Traddles now as an adult, he laughs, but always feels a little bit bad. Was a sort of chorus in general, and affected to be convulsed with mirth at the comic parts, and to be overcome with fear when there was any passage of an alarming character in the narrative. So mirth, which really isn't a very common word these days, is something that means happiness, good times. So sometimes, let's go back over this. So when he thought of Traddles, he would laugh and cry, which was like a chorus in general, that sometimes would make him laugh, mirth, at the comic parts, and to be overcome with fear, the tears, when there was any passage of an alarming character in the narrative. This rather put me out very often. So this made me feel sad or depressed very often. It was a great jest of his, I recollect, to pretend that he couldn't keep his teeth from chattering. Okay, so jest is like laughing or comedy. And so it was a great joke that he used to make, that he couldn't stop his teeth from chattering. Chattering teeth would be like, wait, I can't do it. I'm going to find a picture of this, because I really can't chatter for you right now. I can't chatter my teeth for you. Let's see. It's better if I show you a picture of this, or animation, if I can find it. Okay, here are chattering teeth. These are chattering teeth, so it's like the up and down movement of teeth. Maybe you've seen, well, it's kind of connected to the word chat. This is chatter, and you have the word chat, which means talking, conversation, because you move your mouth like this. That's chatting. And chatter is gossip. So if you say, I hear chatter, that means I hear gossip. And that's pretty common, even now. This is an old book, but we still use that. Okay, now let's go back to our story. Okay, so Traddles used to make jokes that he couldn't stop his teeth from chattering. So just like that picture I showed you. And let's see, to pretend he couldn't keep his teeth from chattering. Whenever mention was made of Alguazil in connection with the adventures of Gil Blas, So I don't know, these are references to old books. And I remember when Gil Blas met the captain of the robbers in Madrid. This unlucky joker counterfeited such an ag of terror. I don't know what that word is, ag. Let's take a look at that. It's not going to be a vocabulary word. It's some kind of word people don't use anymore. Some kind of illness. It's so some kind of sickness related to shivering, moving like this. So let's see. How are they using it? An ag of terror. So agging. I've never heard this word before in my life. I'm just looking it up now. But agging is shivering like this. So an ag of terror would be like, ooh, that's horrible. You don't have to worry about it. It's not a word that people use that I know of. I've never heard it. Okay, let's see. So the captain of the robbers in Madrid, this unlucky joker, counterfeited such an ag of terror when he was overheard by Mr. Creakle, who was prowling about the passage and handsomely flogged for disorderly conduct in the bedroom. Oh, that's really a Let's read that again. It was a great jest of his, I recollect, to pretend that he couldn't keep his teeth from chattering. So he would make that, and I guess he would pretend that he couldn't stop it from happening, and that would make people laugh. Whenever mention was made of Alguazil in connection with the adventures of Gil Blas. And I remember when Gil Blas met the captain of the robbers in Madrid, this unlucky joker counterfeited such an ag of terror. So, what I think they're saying in this paragraph is they're in the bedroom. Davy is telling the story, this story of Gil Blas in Madrid, and Traddles did his famous and making his teeth chatter, but Mr. Creakle heard it, and he came in and he beat him very badly. So he's just recalling that incident. Whatever I had within me that was romantic and dreamy was encouraged by so much storytelling in the dark. So this is really a wonderful memory for him. These times that they shared, in the bedroom, going to sleep in the dark, and him telling these stories, and all the boys listening to the stories. In that respect, the pursuit may not have been very profitable to me, but the being cherished as a kind of plaything in my room, and the consciousness that this accomplishment of mine was bruited out among the boys and attracted a good deal of notice to me, though I was the youngest there, stimulated me to exertion. Such complicated language. So he's just saying this made him popular. This made all the boys like him. And he really remembers and enjoys that situation. In a school carried on by sheer cruelty, whether it is presided over by a dunce or not, there is not likely to be much learnt. So a dunce is another word for a stupid person, an idiot. So he's saying, the only thing that ever happened in this school was that people were being beaten and hurt. And it doesn't matter that Mr. Creakle was an idiot, a dunce. Even if he was a very smart person, all they did was beat you. So you never learned anything in this school. You just got beaten. I believe our boys were generally as ignorant as set up as any school boys in existence. Wait, let me read that again. I believe our boys were generally as ignorant as a set as any school boys in existence. So Davy thought all schools were like this. That's what they did in school. They beat you. They were too much troubled and knocked about to learn. They could no more do that to advantage than anyone can do anything to advantage in a life of constant misfortune, torment, and worry. But my little vanity and Steerforth's help urged me on somehow, and without saving me from much, if anything, in the way of punishment, made me for the time I was there an exception to the general body, insomuch as I did steadily pick up some crumbs of knowledge. So, in very simple language, he's saying he actually did learn a little bit, but maybe it was in spite of the school. So the school didn't teach him anything. But somehow he managed to learn. In this, I was much assisted by Mr. Mell, who had a liking for me, and I am grateful to remember. It always gave me a pain to observe that Steerforth treated him with systematic disparagement. So Davy liked Mr. Mell, but Steerforth didn't like Mr. Mell and used to say bad things about him, and seldom lost an occasion of wounding his feelings or inducing others to do so. So Steerforth was actually not very nice to Mr. Mell and used to say bad things to him, and he used to encourage other people to say bad things to him. This troubled me the more for a long time, because I had soon told Steerforth, from whom I could no more keep such a secret than I could keep a cake or any other tangible possession, about the two old women Mr. Mell had taken me to see, and I was always afraid that Steerforth would let it out and twit him with it. Okay. So I guess when Davy was being taken to the school, I guess it was, I don't remember, but I guess it was Mr. Mell who was taking him to the school. They stopped somewhere along the way to visit two old women. But I don't know why Davy thinks that's such a big secret. Nothing really happened there. They had food there, and the women weren't very friendly or nice to Davy, from what I remember. But I'm not sure why he thinks that should be a secret. But maybe he wants to say that he likes Mr. Mell. Okay, well, let's see. We little thought of anyone. We little thought of any one of us, I dare say, when I ate my breakfast that first morning, and I went to sleep under the shadow of a peacock's feathers, to the sound of a flute, what consequences would come of the introduction into those almshouses of my insignificant person. But that visit had its unforeseen consequences of a serious sort, too, in their way. So, just to review, Mr. Mell was in charge of taking Davy to the school, and he stopped at a place called an almshouse. That would be a place where very poor people who don't have any food or money would live. And there in that almshouse were the two old ladies. And Davy is saying that that was a very important night for him. I'm not sure why. I mean, I've read this story a million times, but I can't remember. But for some reason, he's saying now that was a very important night for him. But I guess we'll see. Okay, one day when Mr. Creakle kept the house from indisposition, which naturally diffused a lively joy through the school. It's hard to read this old print. This is like 100 years old. It's really hard to read some of it. There was a good deal of noise in the course of the morning's work. The great relief and satisfaction experienced by the boys made them difficult to manage. And though the dreaded Tungay brought his wooden leg in twice or thrice and took notes of the principal offenders' names, no great impression was made by it, as they were pretty sure of getting into trouble tomorrow, do what they would, and thought it wise, no doubt, to enjoy themselves today. Okay, so all the boys, for some reason, are in an excited state, and they're making a lot of noise. And Mr. Tunge came with his fake leg, I guess, to hit them or hurt them, and he was all, but he couldn't control all of the boys, so he was keeping track of who was misbehaving. But nobody cared. Everybody was too excited for some reason. It was properly a half holiday, being Saturday, but as the noise in the playground would have disturbed Mr. Creakle, and the weather was not so favorable for going out walking, we were ordered into the school in the afternoon and set some lighter tasks than usual. So it was some type of holiday, but the weather was bad. There was nowhere to go. So even though they should have been outside having fun and playing, they made them go into the classroom to do light work. It was the day of the week on which Mr. Sharp went out to get his wig curled. So Mr. Mell, who always did the drudgery, whatever it was, kept the school by himself. Let's put the word drudgery up here. We haven't put a word up in a while, so let's put up drudgery. Drudgery are the everyday things that you do that are boring, that are not interesting. So if you talk about the drudgery of work, it means you think your work is very boring. You do the same thing every day. It's not stimulating. It's boring. Let's see, how do they use drudgery here? Mr. Mell, who always did the drudgery, whatever it was, kept the school by himself. So it was a holiday. Most of the people who run the school had left, and it was only Mr. Mell who was there to do the drudgery, which maybe means feeding the boys, cleaning the floors, things like that. The daily boring things that are not interesting or stimulating. If I could associate the idea of a bull or a bear with anyone so mild as Mr. Mell, I should think of him in connection with that afternoon when the uproar was at its height, as one of those animals baited by 1,000 dogs. Oh, goodness. So, Mr. Mell is alone by himself, or almost by himself, and I guess he doesn't know how to handle all of these boys who are excited and having fun and having a great time. I recall him bending his aching head, supported on his bony hand, over the book on his desk, and wretchedly endeavoring to get on with his tiresome work amidst an uproar. Uproar means a lot of noise that might have made the Speaker of the House of Commons giddy. So he's very annoyed. He's just trying to read his book, but all the boys are making so much noise that he's having a difficult time. Boys started in and out of their places, playing at Puss in the Corner with other boys. So I guess that's some Victorian game, Puss in the Corner. I have no idea what that means. They were laughing boys, singing boys, talking boys, dancing boys, howling boys, boys shuffled with their feet, boys whirled around him, grinning, making faces, mimicking him behind his back and before his eyes, mimicking his poverty, his boots, his coat, his mother, everything belonging to him that they should have consideration for. Oh, so the boys were really acting horrible. Okay. "Silence!" cried Mr. Mell, suddenly rising up and striking his desk with the book. "What does this mean? It's impossible to bear it. It's maddening. How can you do it to me, boys? Why are you doing this? Why are you making all of this noise? Stop it." It was my book that he struck his desk with, so it was Davy's book. And as I stood beside him, following his eye as it glanced round the room, I saw the boys all stop, some suddenly surprised, some half afraid, and some sorry perhaps. Steerforth's place was at the bottom of the school, at the opposite end of the long room. He was lounging with his back against the wall, his hands in his pockets, and looked at Mr. Mell with his mouth shut up as if he were whistling. When Mr. Mell looked at him. "Silence, Mr. Steerforth," said Mr. Mell. "Silence yourself," said Steerforth, turning red. "Oh my." "Whom are you talking to?" "Sit down," said Mr. Mell. "Sit down yourself," said Steerforth, "and mind your business." There was a titter and some applause, but Mr. Mell, we'll look at the picture in a second, was white. That silence immediately succeeded, and one boy, who had darted out behind him to imitate his mother again, changed his mind and pretended to want a pen mended. Wow. Oh, what's going to happen? So let's see. Let's just take a look at this picture since we've got it here. So here is a picture of what it looked like in the classroom that day, with Mr. Mell and Steerforth being very bold, being very brave, and standing up to Mr. Mell. Okay, well, let's go back. Wait a minute. Is this right? Okay. "If you think, Steerforth," said Mr. Mell, "that I am not acquainted with the power you can establish over any mind here." He laid his hand without consideration what he did, as I supposed, upon my head. Well, let's look at that again. "If you think, Steerforth," said Mr. Mell, "that I am not acquainted with the power you can establish over any mind here." So he's saying, if you think I don't know the power you have over the boys. He laid his hand without consideration, as he did, I suppose. So he put his hand on Davy's head as he said this. He put his hand on Davy's head and said, "If you think I don't know how you can control these boys, or that I have not observed you within a few minutes urging your juniors on to every sort of outrage against me, you are mistaken." So he's saying, I know that you are telling the boys, you're encouraging the boys to act badly. And I know they listen to you. That's what he's saying. "I don't give myself the trouble of thinking at all about you," said Steerforth coolly. So I'm not mistaken, as it happens. So Steerforth is saying, I don't know what you know because I don't think about you. I don't care about you. Wow. All right. "And when you make use of your position of favoritism here, sir," pursued Mr. Mell, with his lip trembling very much, so Mr. Mell is extremely angry, "to insult a gentleman." "A what?" said "Where is he?" said Steerforth. So the teacher, Mr. Mell, is saying, "How dare you insult me? I'm a gentleman." And Steerforth says, "Gentleman? Where's it? There's no gentleman here." Here somebody cried out, "Shame J. Steerforth. Too bad." It was Traddles, whom Mr. Mell instantly discomfited by bidding him hold his tongue. "To insult one who is not fortunate in life, sir, and who never gave you the least offense, and the many reasons for not insulting whom you are old enough and wise enough to understand," said Mr. Mell, with his lip trembling more and more. So Mr. Mell is saying, maybe I'm poorer than you. Maybe your parents have money so they can send you to this school, but you should know better than to talk to somebody like this just because they don't have money. And anyway, why are you doing this? I never did anything to you. Why are you causing problems for me? You can sit down or stand up as you please, sir. Copperfield, go on. Young Copperfield, said Steerforth, coming forward up to the room, stop a bit. I tell you what, Mr. Mell, once and for all, when you take the liberty of calling me mean or base or anything of that sort, you are an impudent beggar. You are always a beggar, you know. You know when you do that, you're an impudent beggar. So Steerforth continues to insult him. I guess Mr. Mell told Davy to go sit down. And Steerforth said, no, don't. And he continues to insult him. I'm not clear whether he was going to strike Mr. Mell or Mr. Mell was going to strike him. So Davy is saying, I'm not sure, maybe Mr. Mell was going to hit Steerforth, or maybe Steerforth was going to hit Mr. Mell. Or there was any such intention on either side, or maybe they weren't going to have a physical fight. I saw a rigidity come upon the whole school, as if they had been turned into stone, and found Mr. Creakle in the midst of us. Uh-oh, Mr. Creakle is here. Tongay at his side, and Mr. and Miss Creakle looking at the door as if they were frightened. So Mr. Creakle is now here. Mr. Mell, with his elbows on his desk, and with his face in his hands, sat for some moments quite still. Mr. Mell, said Mr. Creakle, shaking him by the arm. And his whisper was so audible now that Tongay felt it unnecessary to repeat his words. You have not forgotten yourself, I hope. No, sir, no, returned the master, showing his face and shaking his head and rubbing his hands in great agitation. No, sir, no, I have remembered myself. No, Mr. Creakle, I have not forgotten myself. I have remembered myself. So maybe it seems like maybe Mr. Creakle is angry because Mr. Mell is arguing with this student. And when Mr. Creakle says, you've forgotten yourself, meaning, are you forgetting that you are in charge here and you're the teacher? And Mr. Creakle says, no, I'm remembering myself, because this student was being very insulting towards him. So he's, instead of maybe just hitting him, he wants to teach him some manners or something. Okay, let's see. If I interpreted that the right way, I don't know. I could wish you had remembered me a little sooner, Mr. Creakle. It would have been more kind, sir, more just, sir. It would have saved me something, sir. Mr. Creakle, looking hard at Mr. Mell, put his hand on Tongay's shoulder and got his feet up upon the form close by and sat upon the desk. After still looking hard at Mr. Mell from his throne, as he shook his head and rubbed his hands and remained in the same state of agitation, Mr. Creakle turned to Mr. Steerforth and said, now, sir, as he don't condescend to tell me, what is this? So Mr. Creakle wants to know what's happening. And he's asking Steerforth. Okay, I'm sorry. I just have to take a 1-minute break. I will be back in just 1 minute. Okay, sorry about that. Let's continue. Let's see here. Where are we going? I just want to put my music back on. Here we go. All right. No, sir, as he don't condescend to tell me, what is this? Steerforth evaded the question for a little while. So that means he tried not to answer. He didn't want to answer the question. Evade is kind of like avoid. It's probably the same word, actually. Okay. I could not help thinking, even in that interval, I remember what a noble fellow he was in appearance, and how homely and plain Mr. Mell looked, opposed to him. So Davy is comparing Steerforth, the student, with Mr. Mell, the teacher, and Steerforth looked very brave and dignified, and Mr. Mell didn't have that quality. So in this situation, Steerforth looked like he was the one in charge. What did he mean by talking about favorites, then? Said Steerforth at length. Favorites, repeated Mr. Creakle, with veins in his forehead swelling quickly. Who talked about favorites? He did, said Steerforth. And pray, what did you mean by that, sir? Demanded Mr. Creakle, turning angrily to his assistant. I don't remember him talking about favorites. I guess I missed that. I meant Mr. Creakle, he returned. Oh. I meant, Mr. Creakle, he returned in a low voice, as I said, that no pupil had a right to avail himself of his position of favoritism to degrade me. Oh. Well, remember, Steerforth is very close with Mr. Creakle's daughter, and this is the favoritism. So Steerforth thinks because he is good friends with the owner of the school's daughter that he can abuse the teacher, that he can insult the teacher. So Mr. Mell is saying that Steerforth is a favorite of Mr. Creakle and never gets in trouble. Okay. To degrade you, said Mr. Creakle. My stars. But give me leave to ask you, Mr. What's-your-name? Oh boy, so he's pretending he doesn't know Mr. Mell's name. That's what you say when you don't remember somebody's name or you don't know it. You call them, what's your name? Or what's your face? That's very common. So Mr. Creakle is pretending not to know Mr. Mell's name. My stars, but give me leave to ask you, Mr. What's-your-name? I don't remember your name. You're not that important. And here Mr. Creakle folded his arms, cane and all, upon his chest, and made such a knot of his brow that his little eyes were hardly visible. So he is looking mean. Whether, when you talked about favorites, you showed proper respect to me. To me, sir, said Mr. Creakle, darting his head at him suddenly and drawing it back again. The Principa of the establishment and your employer. So he's saying, if you think I show favorites, you're disrespecting me, and it's my school. I should not have done so if I had been cool. So here Steerforth struck in. Then he said I was mean, and he said that I was base, and I called him a beggar. So mean and base just means maybe very bad manners and not very kind of intelligent, I guess you could say. Mean and base. He likes low things, bad things. and I called him a beggar. If I had been cool, perhaps I shouldn't have called him a beggar, but I did, and I'm ready to take the consequences of it. So Steerforth is saying, I called him a beggar, which wasn't very nice, and I'm sorry. I shouldn't have done it, but go ahead and punish me. I deserve it. Without considering perhaps whether there were any consequences to be taken, I felt quite in a glow at this gallant speech. It made an impression on the other boys too, for there was a low stir among them, though no one spoke a word. I'm surprised, Steerforth. Although your candor does you honor, said Mr. Creakle. Does you honor, certainly. I'm surprised, Steerforth, I must say, that you should attach such an epithet to any person employed and paid in Salem House, sir. So Mr. Creakle is saying, I'm happy that you're being honest. It's good that you're being honest, but I don't like what you did. That's not an answer, sir, said Mr. Oh, wait, I skipped something here. Steerforth gave a short laugh. So Mr. Creakle said, I'm happy that you're being honest, but I don't like what you said about Mr. Mell. And for some reason, Steerforth laughed. And Mr. Creakle said, that is not an answer, sir, to my remark. I expect more than that from you, Steerforth. If Mr. Mell looked homely in my eyes before the handsome boy, homely is a polite way of saying ugly, and is still used. You can use it. If you say that somebody is homely, that means they're ugly. So he's saying if Mr. Mell looked homely, if he looked ugly in my eyes before that handsome boy, Steerforth, it would be quite impossible to say how homely Mr. Creakle looked. So if Mr. Mell looked ugly in front of Steerforth, Mr. Creakle looked even uglier compared to Steerforth. Let him deny it, said Steerforth. Deny that he is a beggar, Steerforth? Cried Mr. Creakle. Why, where does he go a-begging? If he's not a beggar himself, his near relation's one, said Steerforth. It's all the same. Okay, so remember when Mr. Mell took Davy to the school, they had to stop at an almshouse. And an almshouse is where very poor people who don't have any money or food go to receive food. And I think they spent the night there with these two old ladies. And Davy told Steerforth this story. So when they were going to school, they stopped at this place for very poor people. And they stayed with these two old ladies who were friends or relatives. This is why Steerforth is calling him a beggar, because he went to that place where beggars go. And that's why he says, if he's not a beggar himself, if he isn't somebody who goes in the street and asks for money, he's in near relation to one, meaning those two old ladies were beggars because they were in the almshouse. And he says, what's the difference? He glanced at me, and Mr. Mell's hand gently patted me upon the shoulder. I looked at him with a flush upon my face and remorse in my heart. So now Davy feels so horrible that he told Steerforth that story, because now Steerforth is using it against him. And he feels very bad. And I guess Mr. Mell understands because he's doing this to Davy. Like, yeah, I know what happened. It's okay. He patted him on the shoulder. But Mr. Mell's eyes were fixed on Steerforth. And he continued to pat me kindly on my shoulder. But he looked at him. Since you expect me, Mr. Creakle, to justify myself, said Steerforth, and to say what I mean, what I have to say is this, that his mother lives in an almshouse. Also, that was his mother. I don't remember that. I just thought that they said two old ladies. Maybe they did. But he's saying his mother lives in a poorhouse, a place for poor people. who don't have enough money for food. Mr. Mell still looked at him and still patted me kindly on the shoulder and said to himself in a whisper, if I heard right, yes, I thought so. So Mr. Mell knows what Steerforth is referring to. That night he took Davy there. Mr. Creakle turned to his assistant with a severe frown and labored politeness. Now, you hear what this gentleman says, Mr. Mell? Have the goodness, if you please, to set him right before the assembled school. He is right, sir, without correction, Mr. Mell. In the midst of the dead silence, what he has said is true. So, let's see. Be so good, then, as to declare publicly, will you, said Mr. Creakle, putting his head to one side and rolling his eyes round the school, whether it ever came to my knowledge until this moment. So Mr. Creakle is saying, well, if it's true, tell everybody that I never knew this about you. This is the first time I've heard this. Why, you know not. I believe not directly, he returned. Why, you know not, said Mr. Creakle, don't you, man? I apprehended you never supposed my worldly circumstance to be very good, replied the assistant. You know what my position is, and always has been here. So he's saying, yes, that's true. You didn't know that I have family in this poor house, this alms house. But you also know that I'm not rich by the way I dress and how much you pay me. So maybe you knew a little bit. I apprehend that if you come to that, said Mr. Creakle, with his veins swelling again bigger than ever, that you've been in a wrong position altogether and mistook this for a charity school, Mr. Mell. We'll part, if you please, the sooner the better. So, Mr. Creakle is saying, if I had known your situation, that you have family members in this poorhouse, I would never have let you into this school. And now I want you to leave. Go away. You're fired. Please leave now. He says the sooner the better, which means do it now. Sir, to you, said Mr. Creakle. Oh, wait. There's no time, answered Mr. Mell, rising, like the present. So Mr. Mell says, fine, okay, I'm leaving. There's no time like the present means now is the best time to do something. Okay, sir, to you, said Mr. Creakle. I take my leave of you, Mr. Creakle, and all of you, said Mr. Mell, glancing round the room and again patting me gently on the shoulder. James Steerforth, the best I wish I can leave you is that you may come to be ashamed of what you have done today. At present, I would prefer to see you anything rather than a friend to me or to anyone in whom I feel interest. So when he says, I take my leave of you, that means I say goodbye. I'm saying goodbye to all of you. And then he says to Steerforth, you're a bad person. You're a very bad person for doing this to me. Once more, he laid his hand on my shoulder, and then, taking his flute and a few books from his desk, and leaving the key in it for his successor, he went out of the school with his property under his arm. Mr. Creakle then made a speech through Tungay, in which he thanked Steerforth for asserting, though perhaps too warmly, the independence and respectability of Salem House, which he wound up by shaking his hands with Steerforth. I'm just going to put that word here, to wind up, which is a phrasal verb, but here what they're to wind up. And actually, here it means like to finish. So to wind up here in this context means to begin to finish something. So he wound up by thanking Steerforth. He finished his speech or his visit to the classroom by thanking Steerforth. All right, let's see. So he wound up by shaking hands with Steerforth. He finished by shaking hands with Steerforth. While we gave 3 cheers. Yay! I did not quite know for what for, but I suppose for Steerforth, and so joined in them ardently, though I felt miserable. So Davy wasn't sure why everyone was so happy. But he joined in the celebration, even though he felt very bad for what happened to Mr. Mell. Mr. Creakle then caned Tommy Traddles for being discovered in tears instead of cheers on account of Mr. Mell's departure. So Traddles was crying because of this horrible thing that happened to Mr. Mell. And so when everybody was celebrating, Traddles was crying, so Mr. Creakle caned him, beat him for crying instead of celebrating, and went back to his sofa or his bed or wherever he had come from. We were left to ourselves now and looked very blank, I recollect, on one another. For myself, I felt so much self-reproach and contrition for my part and what had happened that nothing would have enabled me to keep back my tears but the fear that Steerforth, who had often looked at me, I saw, might think it unfriendly, or I should rather say, considering our relative ages, that the feeling with which I regarded him undutiful, if I should show emotion which distressed me. He was very angry with Traddles, and he said he was glad he had caught it. So after all of this happened, Davy felt very sad, and he wanted to cry. Really, really he wanted to cry. But he couldn't, because if he cried in front of Steerforth, that would show disloyalty to Steerforth, which would make him very unhappy. Poor Traddles, who had passed the stage of lying with his head upon his desk and was relieving himself with his usual burst of skeletons, said he didn't care. Mr. Mell was ill-used. Who has ill-used him? You. You, girl? Said Steerforth. Why, you have, returned Traddles. So, Traddles was saying he doesn't feel bad for crying. He feels bad for Mr. Mell because he shouldn't be treated in that way. And Steerforth says, what, who treated him badly? And Traddles said, you did. You're the one who did it. What have I done? Said Steerforth. What have you done? Retorted Traddles. Hurt his feelings and lost him his situation. His feelings? Repeated Steerforth disdainfully. His feelings will soon get the better of it, I'll be bound. His feelings are not like yours, Miss Traddles. As to his situation, which was a precious one, wasn't it? Do you suppose I'm not going to write home and take care that he gets some money, Polly? So he's saying that he didn't hurt the teacher's feelings, and he's planning to write to his parents and explain the situation and have his parents send him some money. And then he calls him Polly, which is a girl's name. So he's accusing Traddles of being a girl for crying and feeling bad about what happened to the teacher. We thought this intention very noble in Steerforth, whose mother was a widow and rich, and would do almost anything, it was said, that he asked of her. So they admired him for wanting to compensate, to give money to the teacher who lost his job. And they knew his mother would do it. We were all extremely glad to see Traddles so put down and exalted Steerforth to the skies, especially when he told us, as he condescended to do, that what he had done had been done expressly for us and for our cause, and that he had conferred a great boon upon us by unselfishly doing it. So he explained to all of the boys that he didn't do it for himself, he did it for the boys. But I must say that when I was going on with the very story in the dark that night, Mr. Mell's old flute seemed more than once to sound mournfully in my tears. And that when at last Steerforth was tired, and I lay down in my bed, I fancied it playing so sorrowfully somewhere that I was quite wretched. So when Mr. Mell brought Davy to the school at the beginning of the year, and they stopped at the almshouse where his mother was, there were two old ladies there. One was his mother, and they said, "Oh, play the flute for us." So he played the flute, and it was very horrible flute playing. But now that Mr. Mell is gone, Davy can hear the flute in his head while he's trying to sleep, and it makes him feel very sad. I soon forgot him in the contemplation of Steerforth, who, in an easy amateur way and without any book, he seemed to me to know everything by heart, took some of his classes until a new master was found. The new master came from a grammar school, and before he entered on his duties, dined in the parlor one day to be introduced to Steerforth. Steerforth approved of him highly and told us he was a brick, without exactly understanding what learned distinction was meant by this. I respected him greatly for it, and had no doubt whatever of his superior knowledge, though he never took the pains with me, not that I was anybody that Mr. Mell had taken. Okay, so they found a new teacher, and Steerforth likes him. Let's just say that. Steerforth approved of the new teacher. There was only one other event in this half year out of the daily school life that made an impression on me, which still survives. It survives for many reasons. One afternoon, when we were all harassed into a state of dire confusion, and Mr. Creakle was laying about him dreadfully, Tungay came in and called out in his usual strong way, "Visitors for Copperfield." A few words were interchanged between him and Mr. Creakle as who the visitors were and what room they were to be shown into. And then I, who had according to custom stood up on an announcement being made and felt quite faint with astonishment, was told to go by the back stairs to get a clean frill on before I repaired into the dining room. Okay, so that was the biggest memory of that first period in school, was this incident with the teacher. But there was also one other thing that happened, and that was one day Davy received a visitor. So the assistant to Mr. Creakle came into the classroom and announced that there was a visitor. And so they told Davy, "Go into the dining room to see your visitors. But before you do, go change into some nice clothes." These orders I had obeyed in such a flutter and hurry of my young spirits as I had never known before. And when I got to the parlor door, and the thought came into my head that it might be my mother, I had only one thought of Mr. or Miss Murdstone until then. I drew back my hand from the lock and stopped to have a sob before I went in. And sob means cry. So he cried a little bit before he went into the dining room to see who his visitor was. At first I saw nobody, but feeling a pressure against the door, I looked round it, and to my amazement were Mr. Peggotty and Ham, ducking at me with their hats and squeezing one another against the wall. I could not help laughing, but it was much more in the pleasure of seeing them than at the appearance they made. We shook hands in a very cordial way, and I laughed and laughed until I pulled out my pocket handkerchief and wiped my eyes. So now Peggotty is the maid, the servant at his mother's house, but she is like a grandmother to Davy. And one summer, Davy went to spend the summer at the beach in Peggotty's brother's house. So he spent the summer on the seashore with her family. And now Mr. Peggotty has come to visit Davy at the school. So that's the servant, the brother of the servant of the house where his mother lived. And Ham, I guess, is kind of, I think he's the nephew of Mr. Peggotty. So Ham and Mr. Peggotty. So that's Peggotty's brother and his nephew. "Cheer up, Master Davy, Bull," said Ham in his simpering way. "Why, how you have growed." And they speak a very irregular kind of English here. Okay. So they're saying, "Wow, you got bigger." "Am I grown?" I said, drying my eyes. So Davy was very happy to see them. I was not crying at anything particular that I know of, but somehow it made me cry to see old friends. "Growed, Master Davy." "Ain't he growed?" said Ham. So he's saying, "Davy, you're all grown up. Hasn't he grown up?" to Mr. Peggotty. They made me laugh again by laughing at each other, and then we all three laughed until I was in danger of crying again. So Davy was very happy to see these people. "Do you know how Mama is, Mr. Peggotty?" I said, "and how my dear, dear old Peggotty is?" "Uncommon," said Mr. Peggotty. "And little Emily and Mrs. Gummidge?" Those are people that live with Mr. Peggotty on the seashore. Mrs. Gummidge, and little Emily is his little friend who he's kind of in love with. She's a little girl that lives with them. I don't remember. I think she's his niece, or her father died because they're all fisher people. They all fish, and I think maybe the father died. No, I think it's a niece. I don't know. I don't remember. We'll see. They'll mention what the relationship is again. But she's a little girl, Davy's age. She lives with Mr. Peggotty on the seashore, and he's kind of in love with her. There was silence. Mr. Peggotty, to relieve it, took 2 prodigious lobsters, an enormous crab, and a large canvas bag of shrimps out of his pockets and piled them up in Ham's arms. So they're fishermen, and they brought Davy all these wonderful things from the ocean, lobsters and shrimp as a present. "You see," said Mr. Peggotty, "knowing you as you was partial to a little relish with your wittles, when you was along with us, we took the liberty. The old mother biled 'em, she did. Mrs. Gummidge biled 'em." "Yes," said Mr. Peggotty, slowly, who I thought appeared to stick to the subject on account of his having no other subject ready. "Mrs. Gummidge, I do assure you, she biled 'em." Okay, so Mr. Peggotty, he is a kind of a non-standard accent that he's using here. But what he said was, "I know how much you love these things, so we caught them. We caught this food for you, this seafood. And Mrs. Gummidge, who lives with them, she cooked them. She boiled them." And that's all he had. He doesn't have anything else to say. They have nothing to say, really. So he just kept saying, "Yep, she sure did. She cooked them. She boiled them." Okay. "We come, you see, the wind and tide making us in our favor, in one of our Yarmouth lugs to Gravesend. My sister, she wrote to me the name of this here place, and to write to me as if I ever chanced to come to Gravesend." I was to come over and to inquire for Master Davy and give her duty, humbly wishing him well and reporting of the family, as they was uncommon to be sure. Little Emily, you see, she'll write to my sister when I go back, as I see, and as you was similarly uncommon, so we make it quite a merry go-rounder. Okay. Well, he's just saying they were out fishing and the boat came into this area where the school is. And he promised his sister that if they were ever in the area, that he should go and visit Davy. And so that's what they're doing. That's why they came to visit, because he promised his sister. I was obliged to consider a little before I understood what Mr. Peggotty meant by this figure, expressive of a complete circle of intelligence. So even Davy doesn't really understand exactly what he's saying. I then thanked him heartily. So Davy was very happy, and he gave a very enthusiastic thank you. And with a consciousness of reddening, that I suppose little Emily was altered too, since we used to pick up shells and pebbles on the beach. She's getting to be a woman. That's what she's getting to be, said Mr. Peggotty. Ask him. So he asks about his little girlfriend, Emily, and he's saying she's getting to be a woman. She's growing up. She's maturing. He meant Ham, who beamed with delight as he sent over the bag of shrimps. Her pretty face, said Mr. Peggotty, was his own shining like a light. Her pretty face, said Mr. Peggotty, with his own shining like a light. So he's very proud of Emily. She isn't his daughter, but she's like a daughter to him, and he's very proud about how beautiful she is. Her learning, said Ham. Her writing, said Mr. Peggotty. Why, it's as black as jet. And so large it is, you might see it anywhere. So they're very proud of her. She's going to school, learning to write. But it's just funny. The only thing he knows to say to compliment her writing is that the ink is very black. Okay, let's see. It was perfectly delightful to behold with what enthusiasm Mr. Peggotty became inspired when he thought of his little favorite. So Davy loved to see how proud Mr. Peggotty was of Emily. He stands before me again, his bluff, hairy face irradiating with a joyful love and pride for which I can find no description. His honest eyes fire up and sparkle, as if their depths were stirred by something bright. His broad chest heaves with pleasure, his strong, loose hands clench themselves with earnestness, and he emphasizes what he says with a right arm that shows, in my pygmy view, like a sledgehammer. Okay. So he's just describing Mr. Peggotty as a big, intimidating man, but he's a very happy, kind person. Ham was quite as earnest as he, I dare say. They would have said much more about her if they had not been abashed by the unexpected coming in of Steerforth, who, seeing me in a corner speaking with two strangers, stopped in a song he was singing and said, I didn't know that you were here, young Copperfield, for it was not the usual visiting room, and crossed by us on his way out. So Steerforth just accidentally comes into the room, and he sees this big fisherman and his nephew visiting Davy, and he's very curious, I think, about this situation. But he leaves. I'm not sure whether it was in the pride of having such a friend as Steerforth, or in the desire to explain to him how I could have such a friend as Mr. Peggotty, that I called to him as he was going away. But I said modestly, good heaven, how it all comes back to me as this long time afterward. Don't go, Steerforth, if you please. These are two Yarmouth boatmen, very kind, good people, who are relations of my nurse, and have come from Gravesend to see me. So, I mean, if they're Davy's going to this school, it's not a nice school, but it's probably expensive, and the boys who go there are probably rich. So it's very strange to see these two fishermen coming to visit Davy, and but Davy's not ashamed. He's very proud. He loves Mr. Peggotty. He loves Peggotty. He loves Ham. He loves all of them. So he says, "No, no, no, don't go. Come and meet these wonderful people." I," said Steerforth, returning. Now, actually, that is another word for yes, and it was much more common 200 years ago than it is now. But sometimes you can still hear people saying I, and it means yes. A-Y-E. "I'm glad to see them. How are you both?" There was an ease in his manner, a gay and light manner it was, but not swaggering, which I still believe to have been born a kind of enchantment with it. So he said hello to them in a very nice way, and it didn't seem insincere. It seemed very sincere. And Davy really appreciated that. "I still believe him in virtue of this carriage, his animal spirits, his delightful voice, his handsome face and figure, and for aught I know, of some inborn power of attraction besides, which I think a few people possess." So he's saying this was a talent of Steerforth's to make people love him, to make people believe in his sincerity. He was a very charming person, and not many people have that quality, but Steerforth has that quality. People just automatically love him and believe him and trust him. To have carried a spell with him, to which it was a natural weakness to yield, and which not many persons could withstand. I could not but see how pleased they were with him, and how they seemed to open their hearts to him in a moment. So, probably in this situation, these fishermen coming to visit these rich boys in a school, they should feel very uncomfortable. But Steerforth is a very charming person, and people always feel very relaxed and comfortable around him. So in a situation where normally they might feel uncomfortable or nervous, actually they feel very comfortable with him. It was a very natural, easy conversation, when normally it probably wouldn't be. "You must let them know at home, if you please, Mr. Peggotty," I said, "when that letter is sent, that Mr. Steerforth is very kind to me, and that I don't know what I should ever do here without him." So he's saying, when you write to Peggotty, please tell them about my wonderful friend Steerforth. "Nonsense," said Steerforth, laughing. "You mustn't tell them anything of the sort. And if Mr. Steerforth ever comes into Norfolk or Suffolk, Mr. Peggotty," I said, "while I am there, you may depend upon it I shall bring him to Yarmouth, if he will let me to see your house. You never saw such a good house, Steerforth. It is made out of a boat." So when Davy spent the summer with Mr. Peggotty, who's a fisherman, the whole family are fishermen, the house was actually an old abandoned boat on the beach right next to the ocean, but they had made it very nice and turned it into a house. So it's kind of like a wonderful story, something a little child would really love to live in, kind of a fantasy, but it was real. They lived in a boat that was on the beach. "Made out of a boat, is it?" said Steerforth. "It's the right sort of house for such a thorough-built boatman." So he's saying it's the perfect house for Mr. Peggotty because he looks like a big, strong boatman, a big, strong fisherman. So 'tis, sir, so 'tis, said Ham, grinning. You're right, young gentleman. Mas'r Davy Bow, gentleman, right. A thorough-built boatman. Whore. That's what he is, too. Okay, so Ham, the nephew, is agreeing. Yes, it is the perfect place for us. Okay, Mr. Peggotty was no less pleased than his nephew, though his modesty forbade him to claim a personal compliment so vociferously. So Mr. Peggotty was very happy with Ham's description of the house, but he was too embarrassed to agree. Well, sir, he said, bowing and chuckling. Chuckling is like laughing. And tucking into the ends of his neckerchief at his breast. I thank ye, sir, I thank ye. I do my endeavours in my line of work, sir. The best of men can do no more, Mr. Peggotty, said Steerforth. He had got his name already. So Mr. Peggotty says, thank you for the compliments. That's just who I am. That's what I do. That's my work. I'm a fisherman. And Mr. Steerforth agrees and says, yes, that's true. You can't be any more than that. And he uses his name. He remembers his name, Mr. Peggotty. And that impressed Davy, that he remembered his name. I'll pound it. It's what you do yourself, sir, said Mr. Peggotty, shaking his head. And what you do well, right well. I thank ye, sir. I'm obliged to you, sir, for your welcoming manner of me. Okay, so Mr. Peggotty agrees. Yes, it doesn't matter how much money you have or who you are in life. It's how you do things. So it's what you do well, right well. So he's a good fisherman, and he can be proud of that. So, and he says, I'm obliged to thank you for your welcoming manner of me. Because normally in this situation, this rich boy probably wouldn't be so kind or considerate with a fisherman. So he's thanking him, saying, thank you for being so kind to me. And then he says, I'm rough, sir, but I'm ready. And when he says I'm rough, that means I don't have the manners that you have. You know, I'm a dirty fisherman, but you can always count on me. You can always rely on me. I'm rough but ready. So maybe I'm not fancy. Maybe I don't have fancy clothes or fancy manners, but you can count on me. You can depend on me to do whatever you need. So I'm rough, sir, but I'm ready. Leastways, I hope I'm ready. You understand? My house ain't much for to see, sir, but it's hearty at your service, if ever you should come along with Mas'r Davy to see it. So he's saying, yes, if you ever come to Yarmouth with Davy, you're welcome to stay in my home. It's not nice, it's not what you're used to, it's rough, but it's ready, it's there for you if you want it. I'm a regular dodman, I am. I don't know what a dodman is, said Mr. Peggotty. Let's look up that word, dodman. What is that? Let's see. I don't even know if that's a real word. Let's see. Dodman meaning. A dodman is a haughty man. Dod is a local English vernacular word for land snail. The word is used in some counties of England. I still don't know what it means. So dodman is another word for snail. I don't know. Maybe that's him saying I'm dirty. I'm nothing fancy. Something like that. I'm a regular dodman. Okay. Well, it's not a standard word. It's not too important to know what it means, I guess. Said Mr. Peggotty, by which he meant a snail. Oh, see, now they explain it. By which he meant a snail, which was an allusion to his being slow to go, for he had attempted to go after every sentence, and had somehow or other come back again. But I wish you both well, and I wish you happy. So, of course, snails are famous for being... If you don't know what a snail is, let me show you a picture of a snail. Let me just bring this up here. This is a snail. Whoops, no, that's a blank screen. This is a snail. So a dodman is a type of snail, but it's only used in a couple of areas, a couple of parts, or a couple of regions of England. So it's not a terribly important word to know. But he says, I'm a regular dodman. I'm very slow. Meaning slow to go. He's very uncomfortable in this situation. You know, he's happy to see Davy, of course. But this is a rich school for rich people, and it's very uncomfortable for him to be sitting and talking to Steerforth because they're from different worlds. So he wants to leave, but it's not easy for him to leave out of this situation. So let's see. But I wish you both well, and I wish you happy. So now he's saying goodbye. Ham echoed this sentiment, so Ham agreed. And we parted with them in the heartiest manner. So it was very nice. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was a very nice, loving goodbye. I was almost tempted that evening to tell Steerforth about pretty Emily. So that's his little girlfriend. But I was too timid of mentioning her name and too much afraid of his laughing at me. So he wanted to tell Steerforth about Emily, but he was afraid that Steerforth would make fun of him. I remember that I thought a good deal, and in an uneasy sort of way, about Mr. Peggotty having said that she was getting on to be a woman, but I decided that that was nonsense. So Mr. Peggotty is saying she's growing, she's maturing, she's becoming like a woman, but Davy said, no. He remembers her. He's a little boy and she's a little girl, and that's what he remembers. He doesn't think of her growing up. We transported the shellfish, or the relish, as Mr. Peggotty modestly called it, up into our room, unobserved, and made a great supper that evening. But Traddles couldn't get happily out of it. He was too unfortunate even to come through a supper like anybody else. He was taken ill that night. Quite prostrate he was, in consequence of crab. Oh no, he got food poisoning from the crab. And after being drugged with black draughts and blue pills to an extent which Demple, whose father was a doctor, said was enough to undermine a horse's constitution, received a caning and 6 chapters of Greek Testament for refusing to confess. So, you know, Traddles is always getting beaten by Mr. Creakle. And he's always, something bad is always happening to Traddles. So this night, he ate the crab and he got sick from the crab. And because he was making noise and got sick, Mr. Creakle beat him. So he got double trouble. First he got food poisoning, and then the owner of the school beat him for being sick. Okay, the rest of the half year is a jumble in my recollection of the daily life. Oh, maybe we'll put that word jumble up here. That could be a word to practice. Again, I'm going to make a practice video so we can practice this vocabulary and use it in sentences so we remember what these words mean. Jumble is like many things mixed together in a very confusing way. So when he says the rest of the year is a jumble in my recollection of the daily strife and struggle of our lives, it means there's nothing special. It's all a bunch of little things mixed together, kind of confusing. That's what jumble means. Of the waning summer and the changing season, of the frosty mornings when we were wrung out of bed, and the cold, cold smell of the dark nights when we were wrung into bed again. Of the evening schoolroom, dimly lighted and indifferently warmed, and the morning schoolroom, which was nothing but a great shivering machine. Shiver is what you do when you feel cold. The alteration of the boiled beef with roast beef and the boiled mutton with the roast mutton, of clods of bread and butter, dog-eared lessons, dog-eared lesson books. Let me just show you what a dog ear is. So when you're reading a book and you do this to the page so you remember where you stopped, that's a dog ear. That's dog earing a page of a book. Cracked slates, tearing blotted copybooks, canings, rulerings, hair cuttings, rainy Sundays, suet puddings, and a dirty atmosphere of ink surrounding all. I well remember, though, how the distant idea of the holidays, after seeming for an immense time to be a stationary speck, began to come towards us and to grow and grow. How from counting months we came to weeks and then to days. So this is just one period of school. But now the holidays are coming. Christmas is coming. Like today. Today's Christmas. And as I got closer, he started thinking about going home, I think. Let's see. How from counting the months we came to weeks, and then we came to days. And how then I began to be afraid that I should not be sent for, and when I learned from Steerforth that I had been sent for, was certainly to go home, had dim forebodings that I might break my leg first. So as the holidays came closer, he was thinking, oh, what if they don't want me to come home? What if they don't send for me? Like, what if they don't send for a ticket? They don't give me a ticket to go home. And but then he learned that he was going home. And then he started thinking, what if I break my leg or something happens and I can't go home? The breaking up day changed its place fast, at last, from the week after week to next week, this week, the day after tomorrow, tomorrow, today, tonight. And when I was inside the Yarmouth Mail and going home, so the Yarmouth Mail, that's the carriage that will take him home to his mother. I had many a broken sleep inside the Yarmouth Mail, so he couldn't sleep very well in this carriage ride, this long ride back to home. And many an incoherent dream of all the things. But when I was awoke at intervals, the ground outside the window was not the playground of Salem House. So he fell asleep, and when he woke up, he was surprised to look out the window and not see the school anymore. He was outside of that world. And the sound in my ears was not the sound of Mr. Creakle giving it to Traddles. And the sound in my ears was not Mr. Creakle beating Traddles, but the sound of the coachman touching up the horses. Okay. All right. Well, that was chapter 7 of David Copperfield. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you, everybody who watched for the entire time. Now remember, I'm going to take these special, interesting words, and I'm going to make fluency exercises, listening and speaking fluency exercises with this vocabulary so that we can practice it. And these videos will be up here soon. So until chapter 8, I will see you later. Have a great holiday. Goodbye.